Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to be unboxing and building the new D9 300 Mark II. Alright, let's cut this open. So the D9 Mark II has the BL Touch sensor instead of the inductive sensor that they had before, as well as a bunch of other improvements. They've changed the Y-axis wheel carriage, or the part that kind of holds the wheels to the Y carriage. And they're coming with the silicone kind of textured glass, similar to what you would see on the new Creality machines. So it's a box within a box, and it's extremely heavy. So we have a getting started guide, and all of the Mark IIs are coming with what they call the Z braces, or the ribs. So these go from the top of the Z to the front corners of the machine. We have just some PLA, a third of a kilogram. This is going to be a box of assembly components and the tools, SD card, and then the 4040 frame. Awful lot of packaging for sure, but it's better than something arriving bent or damaged. So we've got the upright. So this is different. The hot end assembly, unlike the original D9, it's already attached to the X rail here. Before you used to have to bolt this onto the carriage. And it looks like they're using the double braces. I think they were using these originally, and then they changed to this, the bottom brace. So we'll take a look at that in more detail in a little bit. And that should be the end of that. All right, so the bed is held stationary with a bunch of saran wrap. Just be careful when you're cutting. There's obviously wires around here that we don't want to be hitting. And so if you followed the video on the Mark II upgrade assembly, we had to take the entire bed off and change the wheel carriage underneath. So there we go. Under here, we've got foam pad. Pull this out. And so here's the wheels that I was mentioning earlier. So now, instead of being 2 in 1, as the previous model was, it's 2 in 2. And the actual carriage that holds the wheels there is a different design entirely. And on the top here, it's coming with that textured, I think it's like a silicone plate. And unlike the Mark II upgrade, it has these nice little side clips here that just kind of pinch it onto the bed. Allows you to remove that. And then you've got the aluminum bed underneath. If this textured surface isn't kind of to your liking, you can flip it over and just use the other side. It's just standard glass. Use it as you would any other glass or mirror. All right, so the uprights here, there are numbers on them, and those numbers correspond to labels that are on the base frame here on the side. So we have 1 on this side, 2 on this side. I have 2 here. Hopefully you can see it. We'll start with this other side here. So this is numbered 1. They have the line. That's for aligning your X-axis height here, or your Z height, to make sure that it's level on both sides. We'll cover that when it's assembled. So 1 and 1, and I'm going to slide it so that this post here goes up through the front of this 4040 rail here in this empty cavity. There's a large T-nut inside here that's holding the stepper motor bracket onto the back, so it obviously makes sense that it goes up the front. And the hole here is going to align with a screw that is already set inside the base frame here. There's a hole that allows you to put an Allen key through the bottom of the 4040 rail into that bolt, and you're going to bolt that into this threaded hole here. So in the front, slide that in there. And then there's a grub screw in there that you're going to tighten to put pressure against the inside of that rail. Make sure everything stays kind of square. All right. So it's kind of nice to have that instead of trying to bolt these through the bottom with nothing holding it stationary. That allows us to kind of set these in place, and then when we tip the unit, they're not gonna pop off or slide out. So we'll do the same with this one, except we have a wire here. This goes to the front back corner here. It's actually labeled E on the back of this base, and it's keyed. It only goes in one way. There's a little notch on the top, so just make sure you've routed that properly. You want to make sure you're not pinching that wire either. It's got to stay right in the middle of here. I'll just stick it out like that. There we go. Tighten that grub screw. Basically squares itself up that way. And if you forget to move those bolts that are facing up, if you forget to align those with the hole that's in the bottom, you can just kind of use a driver and poke through the back to push them forward. Okay, at this point, we'll take number 4 here, which is the top rail. We're going to loosen these screws that are in here and kind of slide it on one side and slide it on the next. There are lock washers here. I'm not entirely sure why. If this was my machine, I probably wouldn't use them. But I'm going to lift the lock washer up so that it goes inside the groove in the extrusion. And then do the same for this side. Got to loosen that one more. There we go. And then we're going to make the sides flush with the sides of the top. So this should all kind of square up. And then through the holes in the top, we can reach that bolt that we just loosened. I'll square up this one side first. Now at this point, I'll put these caps back on so I don't lose them. And then if I tip this on its side, hopefully you can see, here's the hole that I was talking about that you can reach up through and bolt into the bottom of the uprights. Okay. So that grub screw that we tightened originally, I loosened it to give me a little bit more clearance so that I can poke the bolt in line with the hole. So I'm just gonna place that back and I'll bolt this in through here. There we go. And then we'll tighten the grub screw up again. And then we'll do the same on the other side. You don't want your bed to do that. You don't want your bed to slide rapidly in any direction because the y-axis, the motor is connected to the board, and that can induce voltage backwards into the board, frying a stepper driver. Let's flip this. Just making sure I'm not crushing any wires. There we go. So, again, the bolt is not there at all. So let's loosen the grub screw. And then retighten the grub screw. So one nice thing about this printer is how heavy it is and stable. Makes it kind of difficult to maneuver around on the table like this though. So at this point, that keyed connector that I talked about earlier, I'm just going to connect it into the back of the front of the unit here in the slot that's labeled E. Okay. And then on this side, we have a couple connectors. This is the X-axis limit switch and the X-axis stepper motor that are not yet connected. We also have the Z-axis stepper motor on this side at least. There's 2 of them. That goes underneath and on the other side of this stepper. Okay. While I'm at it, I'm going to connect the stepper motor on the other side in a similar fashion. Okay. So now for the new hot end assembly. The board inside here is different to accommodate the BL Touch. It's the same board that we used on the MK2 upgrade kit, but different from the upgrade kit is the placement of the BL Touch. So before we used to have an inductive and then later, capacitive and then later an inductive sensor that went through a hole here. To accommodate the BL Touch on the MK2 upgrade kit, they included a bracket that placed the BL Touch over here. So it's in a different location, and as such, you need to use a different version of the firmware that has that Y offset value properly set, so that the firmware knows where in relation to the actual nozzle is the tip of the BL Touch sensor. So in the side here, there's already a screw that's threaded through the bar, and this entire unit is going to get installed kind of like that. But we're missing a couple key pieces here. So in this bag, there's these like large cylinders, and these connect to the back plate of here and into the back of the 2020 rail using a T-nut. So unlike the original D9, it doesn't use T-nuts to connect to the back of the 2020. On this side, we saw that there was already a bolt pre-installed, so there is this little guy here that goes through the hole on this side. And they've numbered these as well. So this is 5 and this one had a 5 on it. And this is just going to thread onto that bolt. This is actually a better way of constructing it because twisting this cylinder to tighten the T-nut was a little bit cumbersome and hard to get those really tight. But now we can just bolt through like normal. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, only the bolt's already pre-installed. All right, and then we have some short and some longer M5 bolts. So it doesn't indicate which of these M5 bolts to use. The shorter ones really wouldn't give you much bite into the cylinder, like maybe 2 or 3 millimeters. So I'm going to use the longer ones. Feed them through the back of these here. Those are going to have to be at the same height, which I will use the line here. So this line used to be a sticker actually on the back, and I'm moving these slowly because I did connect the stepper motors to the board. And so we're going to screw right through the back of those cylinders that we attached. Good. I'm just checking all the wheels. They're all sufficiently tensioned. And then we may as well connect the rest of our cables here. So as I said earlier, here's the limit switch. And then the stepper. All right. Put the little PTFE tube in the top. This is nice because your filament, whether it's abrasive or not, eventually over time, since it's feeding down through the top here, can wear a groove in this plate. And so they've made the hole a nice snug fit for a piece of PTFE. Sometimes you have to cut the PTFE on a 45 just to feed it in there. I'll feed that in a little bit later. Let's put the cover back on. So another major change in the Mark II is the cooling fan. So previously the cooling fan blew into a shroud that tried to direct it towards the hot end, and now it's a radial fan, 4010 I think, that's blowing directly at the nozzle, just right through the opening of the fan with no shroud. And in this case it's sucking the air from the bottom. I think the MK2s were actually pulling the air from the top here. Regardless, it's much better than the original cooling fan setup on the D9s. So maybe I should unbox the rest of the components inside here. So they give you all of the tools you're going to need to assemble the unit. They give you a hex wrench here, or hex driver. And in this bag there are also the T-nuts and the bolts to attach the Z braces to the top of the frame. We have a USB cable. There is an all-metal hot end. So once upon a time, the D9s were coming with the all-metal hot end installed. If you've got one in the box, that means you have a PTFE lined hot end on the unit right now. It does say that this is for high temperature materials only, 260 to 300 C. I use the all metal hot end just fine with all the other materials, but to each his own. The 8 gig SD card, full size SD. A couple extra pieces of this rubber material that holds the wiring into this little groove here. So along the top here, for example, I would pinch that wire in with this rubber piece, and then from here it can come down, and it's notched. It will connect into the back of the interboard here. And the interboard now has this clamping mechanism so that the wire can't kind of wiggle itself free anymore, which is nice. So we have T-nuts in that bag, and those T-nuts are going to be used for the top of the Z braces. To attach these braces, we're going to use these large T-nuts and the M5 bolts that were in that bag. And for those of, there we go. For those of you that don't know, these T-nuts go into these grooves, and they can either go in and spin, or you can slide them in the end like I have, but once they've spun, they'll be like that, and they'll lock into this channel. So for fun, I'm going to slide this in and pre-install it on here. So on the top of here, drop a M5 bolt, thread the T-nut on with the little raised section facing up in this case. Okay. And then on the bottom, M5 bolt coming out the bottom with the T-nut lightly threaded onto that. These are T-nuts or hammer nuts, depending on who you ask. And so the top one we can slide in like kind of pre-rotated if we wanted. The bottom one though has to drop in. So it needs to be lined up with the slot, and then it just slides in. And then when we rotate the bolt, it will actually rotate inside the channel. Maybe we can demonstrate that up here. So as I connect, it's not quite rotated all the way. So you can see through there now, it's locking it right into the slot. I'll tighten that down good. And then line up the bottom, and we'll do the same thing. You can kind of look through the groove to see if it's rotated. From this angle, it's impossible for me. There. Aha. They make a slit in the front of the brace to make this a lot easier to get your driver through. Here we go. There. And that really helps stiffen up the entire assembly here so that when you're printing a high print and the bed's moving back and forth, it doesn't have any wobble to it. They used to use a much larger 90-degree brace here, and they didn't use the Z braces, and then they switched to the grub screw method, and that's when they introduced the Z braces as an add-on. I'm gonna put that cap back in the top before I lose it, and we'll do the same thing with this side. So the holes in the top are actually slits to allow you to align the T-nut right into the center of that gap. If it's too close to either side, it won't have enough room to fully rotate in the slot. So using that to your advantage, get it to rotate, and then down here as well. All right, we're almost done. Last few pieces here in the box, they also give you a hex driver, power cord, and kind of their trademark nozzle unclogger. This rod allows you to push right through the hot end since it's a straight line, and unjam anything that's caught in, say, the heat break or the hot end region. You can just push it out the bottom. So their spool holder sits something like this, and then the nut is pre-threaded onto this piece, just sandwiches onto this plate. And then we're going to install this with more T-nuts. This is where we'll be using the shorter bolts, because if they're too long, they'll actually bottom out. And then we'll align the T-nuts like this with the groove, drop it in, and then make sure that they're rotated. Right. And that is the wrong way. That's better. So they give you this little retractor here. I'm not sure if it's entirely necessary. I guess if you got to higher heights that this wire could come into contact with the print, I guess. So you can put this like this, and then it clips onto the wire just to constantly provide like a little bit of tension there. There we go. So it's always holding that wire up. So now we can turn the printer on and we can go through the leveling process, which starts with setting the Z offset. Before I do that, I want to make sure a few quick things. I like to make sure that each corner of the bed is equally tightened so that the gap between this undercarriage and the bottom of the aluminum plate is equal on each of the four corners. Out of the box, these little nuts can be extremely loose to the point of almost falling off, and that's going to make leveling really difficult. This doesn't have to be super precise. You can pull out your calipers if you want, or you can just kind of eyeball it and get it close enough, and the BL Touch should be able to make up for the rest. The key piece here is that they're close and that there's tension on the springs, because otherwise it's just going to kind of bounce around as it moves forward and back. Okay, that should be close. And we're also going to make use of those white lines to level the X gantry here, because this could be quite askew. You know, I'm exaggerating it, but something like that. Because there's only a single connection point still between the 2020 rail and the wheel carriage here, it allows it to kind of pivot on that one point. If there was 2 points of contact there, it would be locked in a lot more securely. But that's what these little lines are for. So choose a point of reference. Maybe I'll choose the top of the 2020 rail and line it up. Might be a little hard for you to see. Line it up with the bottom of that white line there, and do the same on the other side. There we go. And when you're moving one side, hold the other coupler stationary because they might both move. There we go. That's probably as close as I can get it by eye anyway. And so now I'll go to level. And it tells me to have a piece of paper or card ready, so I'm going to kind of use the standard paper drag technique. It'll home X and Y, it'll home Z at the front corner, and then it will go to kind of the safe Z homing spot in the center of the bed, and home itself one last time where we'll adjust the Z offset. Okay, so this is where it thinks 0 is right now on the Z, and obviously there's piles of height there. So you can press Z down and move in small increments. You can move in 0.1 or in full 1 millimeter increments. I have more than a full millimeter, so maybe I'll speed this along. There we go. Flip back to 0.1 and move it down one touch at a time. There we go. So now we've got drag. And in case I didn't mention it before, you should be doing all of this at operating temperature. You want to have your bed up to temperature, your nozzle up to temperature, because things expand when they're heated, and that will affect the readings that we're currently getting. So I've got that at the proper amount of drag. I'll hit next, and now it's going to go through a full bed leveling sequence. So it's done that sequence. That's the exact same sequence it would go through if you did a G29 in your start script. So G28 to home all axes, and then G29 to kick off the ABL sequence. And then that mesh that it builds will be used to compensate for any unlevelness in the bed or dips in the bed or anything like that during your print. I tend to use that in my start script all the time. Even if you're using G29 on a machine that doesn't have an ABL, it will just ignore it because there's nothing for it to do. So I can just have one consistent start script for all my machines. So that is the D9 Mark II and the notable upgrades and changes within. Hopefully you found that useful. Remember to like and subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when we upload more videos like this, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions about the D9 Mark II or comments or suggestions about anything you've seen on the channel. Thanks for watching.